The bark echoed off the basement walls like a gunshot, slicing through the air and making the last agent fall motionless for a second. The belt was dirty inside the cage, and the metal was cold. A sharp sound that a young prisoner heard hurling an insult into the air and bouncing off his feet. Knowing how the dog is more aggression from the corporation, the lost cause that never managed to rehabilitate itself, the shadow that greased the gunpowder and bled. Mark watched from the other side of the one-way glass, arms crossed and jaw clenched, gauging each animal's reaction as if reading a living document. Rage. I managed to get close enough to switch him. But that day, something minimal, almost ridiculous, almost shattered that certainty. A double note that fell right in front of Rex's head, which took years to get underground. Inside the kennel, the smell of chlorine and metal mingles with the ghostly memory of hot sand and helicopter fuel. A concrete rectangle, a hard plastic bed, a metal container, and the bitter music of human footsteps that stop, and continue. Deep in his mind, the barracks room was mistaken for another cell, a larger one, with crumbling cinder block walls and a thick smell of sweat, dust, and fear that he felt beneath his feet. There was also a human being there who wasn't afraid of him, who was even looking toward the house amidst the commotion. Tom. Tom kept returning to the fragments of Rex's memory like a luminous shadow. His hand was steady on the ground, his deep voice echoed in his ear. The smell of weak coffee mixed with cheap tobacco and neutral soap. It unsettled him even more, as if he wanted to run out and find him, even though the path was buried under too much earth. In the observation room, Mark closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Rex's guttural roar reminded him of things he'd decided to bury. An entire night, a building that collapsed after an explosion, the sound of a machine gun ricocheting off the back of an armored truck. He didn't say it out loud, but it was true, and this person shared more than just trauma. He shared a silent language filled with shock, insomnia, and recurring nightmares. "So what does the report say, boss?" one of the agents asked, breaking the awkward silence. "An extensive military record, with deployments to combat zones and multiple successful operations," Mark replied, without taking his eyes off the animal. "Aggressiveness." It confirmed what everyone thought, those who tried to recreate the original Bond with patience and discipline, but no one managed to cross the invisible wall that the dog had erected. Stress and irrational, the only brother who ever stopped moving under the bloody sand. Mark placed the file on the table and touched the bridge of his nose. He knew how to read between the lines in these kinds of stories, which were all too similar to his own. Perhaps that's why he was assigned to Rex. "I'm going in alone," I say, taking the work strap and the reinforced mouthpiece. "Is it safe, sir?" the inmate asks, looking up. Mark just smiled, a mute man with no sense of humor. "Don't worry," he replied. Meanwhile, in another building of the complex, Emily walked through an administrative room, clutching a brown wall too tightly to her chest. Another step, in the image of an officer knocking on her door, his face grave and his hands tense at his belt. Years have passed since she said that Tom would not return, recalling that the war had ripped her husband from his ashes, despite the life he had planned. And yet, here I am now, walking through the doors of a police training center, feeling as though I am betraying a promise I never made before. "Stay here, Mrs. Carter," I tell the receptionist as I hand her a form across the counter. "This is to authorize the review of the record and the possible transfer of custody, should the committee approve it." Emily hesitated upon hearing the word custody. Buried. Tom always said that Rex wasn't just a working dog, he was part of the family. He remembered perfectly how his husband spoke on the phone, in those quick calls from the base, as if he were talking to a human colleague. "The bastard saved me once today, but one day you'll love watching him play with Lily." But that one day never came. Emily stood firm, her hand hesitant. Beside her leg, Lily balanced on the tips of her tennis shoes, bored with so many workshops and so many words she didn't understand. "Mommy, are we almost done?" she asked, gently tugging at her blouse. "We're finished, sweetheart," Emily replied, without looking at her. "Now we're going to watch something very special, okay?" Lily watched the scene with a mixture of impatience and curiosity. She didn't quite understand what he meant by something he'd been talking about these past few days. She only knew it had something to do with her father, very small. In her little girl's world, her absence was filled with fantasy. She imagined her father living on a secret base in space, that someone would descend in a ship with blue lights to find her. When she heard the word dog in her mother's phone conversation, her imagination shifted. Now Sonyaba had a hero dog who watched over her dad and who, for some reason, was still there, waiting to be reunited with them. This crossroads, the broken man watching Rex, the widow signing papers, the little girl opening her enormous eyes, had not yet been revealed in the central cell from where they all explored the law. Mark opened the door to the training area with a slight creak. Rex saw it before he saw it. Body. The first growl was low, more of a warning than an attack. Mark stops a few feet away, avoiding eye contact, maintaining the posture of someone who respects personal space but doesn't want to be intimidated by his teeth. A routine promise. "Relax, soldier," he murmured, using that tone he knew so well, the one that lies just between an order and a comfort. "There are no explosions here, okay?" The word soldier conjured up something dark in Rex's mind. It was the tone of voice Tom used, not the same, but similar, when he adjusted his harness before entering a suspicious building. The scream was heard, small, almost invisible, but real. It wasn't just fury. There were active memories in that tense body, memories that could still be touched delicately. Mark took another step. Rex responded with a violent jerk against the fence, letting out a sharper growl that made the officers on the other side of the country stiffen. The metallic sound sliced through the air like a knife on a plate. "Relax," Mark repeated, without backing down. In Rex's mind, the word true did not evoke rain, just like the crackling sound near a pomegranate. The world shrank to a dark hiss and an overwhelming smell of disturbed earth. Other brothers watched the empty gaze of their companion with a stained blanket. Since then, every scream, every threshold, every cry in a country has been triggered, and I remember it like a sigh. Mark understood immediately. He didn't need anyone to explain how a sound could become a detonator. "I'm going to leave myself here with a mouse," I say in a low voice, more to myself than to the dog. Rex sniffed the air again. The human wasn't holding him directly, nor was he backing away. And so it was, one in front of the other, separated by beams of light that shone under the white light. The room was filled with an expectant silence, broken only by their deep breaths. What no one expected, a girl. Emily and Lily, guided by an assistant, made their way to the observation room. The official plan was simple. They would show Rex through the glass in a controlled session, while Mark explained the dog's condition and the realistic chances of him ever being able to live in a new home. However, the emotional situation was a chaotic mess. Emily still didn't know if she wanted to see Rex run, and Lily just wanted to stop walking down boring streets. As she turned the corner into the kennel corridor, Lily felt something strange, a dizziness in her hands. "Excuse me," I moved forward a few meters, taking advantage of the fact that the assistant was busy talking to Emily. Their white sneakers squeaked softly against the floor as they stepped into the wide corridor. Rows of cages, dogs of varying sizes, staring, barking, some completely ignoring us. The beams, breathing heavily, stood before a man sitting on the floor. Lily didn't think she had gotten out of there, but the word Rex crossed her mind as if someone were whispering in her ear. His heart read a small toy on his chest. With the notebook tucked tightly under his arm, he ran toward the cage before anyone could stop him. He crossed the yellow line painted on the floor that indicated restricted area without even seeing it, guided only by that elusive feeling of recognition. There is no rule that justifies it. Mark looked up and saw the quick footsteps approaching at full speed. Who doesn't know what it's like to be afraid? Emily opened her mouth to call out her daughter's name, but her voice suddenly rose. The assistant exclaimed in alarm, "Mr. Mark!" It all happened in 3 seconds that everyone would remember as a square frozen in time. Rex also saw the violin. When Lily reached the cage, her fingers lightly brushed against the notebook she was betraying. Bored in the waiting room, she had earlier written a sort of letter to an imaginary dog. "If you feel lonely, I can be your friend." The day turned cold, and the world was full of alien life. But what happened was nothing like what the protocols predicted. The smell of paper and ink mixed with something more intense, a perfume hidden deep in your memory. Gentle lavender, baby laundry detergent, warm milk on a cotton t-shirt. Rex lowers his mouth with unnatural slowness. The thick saliva coating the roots falls in 2 drops, but not onto the leaf. And then he died. His eyes, once illuminated by anger, clouded over with something else, a kind of painful bewilderment. A shy smile appeared on Lily's face. Without knowing why, she raised her free hand and extended it between the beams, stopping halfway. "Hi," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hey, will you stay with me?" The question made no sense to the adults present. For Rex, however, the words fell like stones into a dark lake. "Will you stay with me?" echoed in that space of his mind where images of Tom mingled with others more blurred. The high-pitched laughter of a baby, tiny hands awkwardly shaking its ears, a man's voice saying, "Be careful, Lily. You're big, but you're also afraid." The cage, the room, the officers, everything crumbled. For a moment, Rex wasn't there, just in a room with light curtains and toys scattered on the floor, laughing. He returned to the present as if someone had left him behind in the cell. Before him, he held again the cold metal, the white light, the girl with the light on the floor, the house on the floor with the scent of a friend, resting his head right in front of the scene. The whole moment seemed to unfold in deathly silence with hardly a bark. Mark opened his eyes as if he'd just witnessed an explosion in reverse. Emily gripped the edge of the rug so tightly her fingers turned white. "It can't be," one of the agents murmured from below. "Is he coming in the same way as you?" the assistant whispered, not daring to move. Rex let out a long sigh, a heavy sigh that seemed to have lasted for years. The boy fell just inches from Lily's fingers. Instead of backing away, the girl slid the weight of a finger between the lace, barely brushing her dog's rough fur. It was a minimal touch, almost imperceptible to anyone's eye. It moved beneath them like a stream of warm water under an ancient hill. Mark finally reacted, slowly approaching. I didn't want to interrupt the moment, but safety was still paramount. "Lily, really?" I said, crouching down slightly to the side. "I need you to calm down, okay?" "She's a little girl, as if she's come out of a trance. That's not going to happen to me," I replied, with the absolute certainty that only children have when they say something is impossible. "That's what I know." Emily approached from behind, her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Lily, darling, let me know if you're a man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please." Lily sighed, but obeyed, withdrawing her hand from the room. With a calculated movement, the first thing that the same hand folded fell into the hands of the one who had entered first. Rex watched the second note fall, as if they were walking along a path, leaving behind a labyrinth that he didn't know was a mother. That was the first visit. I didn't plan it that way, but from that moment on, nothing in Rex's routine was ever the same. In the following days, Mark noticed such subtle changes that he found it easier to attribute them to his desire to see progress. Rex took a little longer to become angry about the sudden noises. The first time Lily returned, she did so with the same inquisitive energy. Emily protested, of course. Part of her wanted to keep her daughter as close as possible to everything she had experienced in Tom's past. Against all instinct, Emily asked for a second meeting with Mark. I can't promise it'll end well, I say honestly. Rex has a very complicated history, and the committee is seriously considering discharging him from the service. Definitely. Emily needed a second to understand the euphemism. Are you talking about? I didn't finish the sentence. Mark continued without further ado. But the other day he spent with his wife is the closest thing to a positive response we've seen in months, he continued. Save him. Thus began an improvised routine, tail game. From Rex's perspective, those days began to differ from one another, vaguely, with quiet evenings. The first noticeable change came when Lily decided to sing. It was a simple song, one Emily had sung as a baby, and which, oddly enough, Tom had learned and clumsily repeated some time ago. Lily sat on a stool in front of the cage, with the wheels together and the notebook in the water, and began to sing softly, almost to herself. Rex raised his head during the first verse. He didn't understand the lyrics, but he recognized the rhythm. The muscles in his body, always tense, relaxed a little. Over several weeks, the changes accumulated. The guards on the second shift sometimes found him fast asleep after only one day of visiting. The surprise was usually physical when Rex obeyed the sentence the first time Lily repeated it, imitating Mark's tone. Of your everyday world. It seems he only heard the truth when she spoke, one of the coaches remarked, sounding both worried and scared. Mark didn't laugh. Meanwhile, Emily was waging a different war within herself, an emotional one. Emily's eyes felt a pain similar to that of dirt after cold rays. On one of those visits, when the routine seemed settled, I had the second big revelation. The day was cloudy, with a cold wind rattling the building's tall windows. A plastic medal, a glittery stone, and several crumpled photos that Emily had allowed me to take from the family album. As Lily spoke with Rex, showing him her secrets one by one of the photos fell out of the box and detached from the edge. Her stomach clenched. In the faded image, a young man in uniform was holding a very small girl, no more than 2 years old. Immediately, not because he knew the dog from before, but because that same stain was there, larger and more diffuse, on Rex's chest, right in front of them. "Can I?" he asked, holding the photo up to Emily. He swallowed. That was the only time Tom took Rex home in his uniform. Mark felt a ringing in his ears, similar to the one he'd learned to hate and combat. "It says, what is this part of the picture?" he began, but I don't know how to finish the sentence. "Your eyes go from the image to the animal in the cage, and I go back." "Yes," Emily said aloud, "that's Rex, when he was first assigned to Tom's unit." Now everything fits perfectly into Mark's mind. The records he consulted, the unit changes, the approximate closings, everything matches up. But seeing the physical evidence in this photo transformed a hypothesis into an irrefutable truth. "So," he would whisper, often to himself, "he didn't just lose his supervisor, he lost his family too." As if something invisible had aligned, Lily returned at that very moment. "Look, Rex," I said, reaching out toward the photo her mother was holding. "This was my dad when he was with you." Emily held her breath, reading the girl to tell her that maybe Rex didn't understand, that she wasn't with you, but with him. Rex jumped up, not violently, but with singular intensity. In her mind, fragments of memories that had been floating for years found a point of unity. Focus on this 8-year-old body with a notebook in its hands and bright eyes. Rex didn't know what a photo was. He didn't understand the concept of the past in a linear way. Meanwhile, Tom laughed and decided, to see them, they'll grow up together. Mark felt a lump in his throat, which was hardly professional. He wasn't the only one witnessing a dog's reunion with its family. Somehow, he too was swept away by his own thoughtful hope. Following this revelation, the atmosphere surrounding Rex's case changed. The committee, which had previously been inclined to confirm his permanent retirement, received Mark's reports with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "I'm not eliminating the risks altogether." Rex continued to behave like a dog conditioned for war, with explosive reflexes to certain stimuli until they caused him harm. But, little by little, the presence of a boss became evident. On the days when Lily couldn't come, whether due to fear, pending tasks, or simple logistical issues, Rex spent restless nights, with more pronounced episodes of anxiety and frequent interruptions. Then Mark proposed something that, in any other context, would have seemed crazy. He planned a controlled session outside the kennel. He would allow Rex to be leashed and muzzled in an open training area, with Lily present and extreme safety measures in place. It was the next logical step to find out if the emotional connection could be maintained without the filter of the beam. However, in the days leading up to this test, the weather decided to intervene. For anyone else, it would have been just an inconvenience. For Rex, it was a latent trigger. The few records he had of previous storms were alarming: panic attacks, desperate attempts to escape, self-harm by knocking down walls. The afternoon the storm finally subsided, Emily hesitated to take Lily to the base. "He's afraid of real people," I say, looking out the window. "He's never alone anywhere." Emily opened her mouth to ask how she knew, but at an unprecedented level. She had learned, little by little, not to question the way her daughter seemed to intuit things about that dog that defied logic. Who knows? At the base, the atmosphere was tense for specific reasons. Rex was transformed from the first bang. His whole body trembled in the cold, like the tolling of an ancient fear shrouded in the roar of the sky. In his mind, there were no colliding clouds. There were explosions all around the convoy. It was the cry of "Get down" that never reached Tom's ears. The first real man, strong as he was on the roof of the building, and found him standing there, spinning around, looking for an exit that didn't exist. The second man pushed him to the edge of something else. The metal, weakened by years of blows, and a minor one to a padlock that didn't last long, gave way. Dilated eyes and a broken heart. A guard shouted his name. Another tried to approach him with a belt. To Rex, they were menacing shadows amidst flashes of inner lightning. His instincts couldn't distinguish allies from enemies in that state. He dodged his companions, brushing past them behind a piece of furniture, and took the only direction his body recognized as possible, toward the exit. The double doors of the room gave way under the weight and the general panic. In an instant, I found myself in the hallway leading to the back training yard, where the wind was howling and the rain was pouring down. The sky was illuminated with flashes of lightning that, for a second, turned white and black. Lily and Emily arrived at reception at that moment. The truth was, they were told to pick up an earring. Over the intercom, a tense voice immediately ordered all staff to remain in the designated secure areas until further notice. Mark sped across the country, cursing under his breath. Every second Rex spent alone in a storm increased the likelihood of disaster. He also knew that if anyone approached him in fear, the consequences could be irreversible. "What happened?" Emily asked when she saw him appear drenched in sweat at the reception desk. Lily felt a knot in her stomach. She couldn't explain why, but a vivid image flashed through her mind. Rex running alone in the rain, searching for something he couldn't find out there. All she could do was conjure up the image of herself running toward the hallway, dodging the adult brothers who were trying to stop her. Emily called his name, but her voice was lost amid the shouts of her next partner. Mark cursed at me again, this time out loud. The worst possible combination had just occurred. The unit's most nervous dog loose in the middle of a storm, and the only person who had managed to calm him down while running was in danger. The rain fell in slanted curtains. Any stumble. Each man threw him back onto a dirt road on the other side of the world. He could smell the burning diesel again. He could hear the screams in a language that wasn't his own. He could see the sound that had preceded Tom's silence. The fear wasn't rational. It was a raw torrent that cut through any interaction. Upon reaching the ditch that separated the courtyard from the small forest surrounding the base, Rex found a poorly secured section. Lily arrived at the patio a few minutes later, instantly getting soaked. Her tennis shoes sank into the mud until they were completely covered. Through the rain, she could see the open gate and the fresh mud marks on the metal. "Rex," she whispered, though she knew her voice couldn't compete with the truth. Behind her, Mark and the agents also came out, with lights and radios. "Lily, stop!" Mark roared, but the girl was crossing the riverbank, in the river itself. Her small silhouette was lost among the dark tree trunks, swallowed up by the storm and the low-lying fog rising from the ground. The forest behind the base wasn't large, but at that moment it seemed like an endless jungle. Rex ran aimlessly, guided only by the need to escape the sound from above. His paws were covered in mud, his lungs burned. She stood up, shaking her head. At that moment, amidst the sound of the rain and the roar of cars on the highway, a clear sound reached her ears, sharp, human, filled with something that pierced the barrier of fear, the cry of a little girl. I stopped dead in my tracks. Her ears twitched, straining to hear. The sound returned, a little clearer. Her name, Rex, mingled with suns and footsteps. Human instinct came face to face with another, older instinct, one that had been ingrained even before the war, to protect, brighter than any lightning flash. Lily stumbled forward among the trees, seeing absolutely nothing. "Rex," I called again, my voice weak. "Please come back. I'm scared." At that precise moment, a cross stopped the wind. To the south, a tall tree, weakened by the damp and the wind, began to lean slowly. Its roots emerged from the mud with a guttural sound. Lily looked up, frozen for a moment. The tree trunk split with a sharp crack and fell right where she stood. Her legs wouldn't respond to her command to run fast enough. It all happened in a chaotic span of moments. A dark shape emerged from the trees on the left, running at full speed. The trunk hit the ground with a loud crash, raising clay and water. For a moment, everything was a chaotic jumble of rain, mud, and whimpers. Rex tried to get up, but his hind leg wouldn't respond. A sharp pain shot through his side. Then he dragged his body far enough to fall between Lily and the branches that kept falling. The girl, stunned, saw a dog beside her, breathing heavily, its gaze fixed on her. "Rex," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why is this happening?" The dog didn't understand the words, but he didn't understand either. The officers' flashlights began to flicker in the distance, white and dark lights among the trunks. Mark shouted their names, bouncing over and over in the mud. "Here!" Lily's voice was barely audible, weak. "Here!" I repeated more loudly as I saw a light approaching. "It's here!" Mark was the first to arrive. The image was etched in his memory. The fallen tree, the girl covered in mud but conscious, and Rex partially trapped under a branch, breathing with difficulty. However, his gaze wasn't lost in panic. It was fixed on Lily, alert, as if he still expected some other danger that might be lurking. "Good kid," Mark murmured, his voice cracking, feeling the wheels slipping southward. "Good kid, man." Together, they managed to lift the branch high enough to free the dog. Rex let out a deep whimper as he watched, but he didn't try to bite anyone. He was in shock, but his gaze kept darting from Lily to Mark, as if searching for confirmation that the little girl was truly in imminent danger. Emily ran off, hugging her daughter so tightly she often couldn't breathe. She wept uncontrollably, mixing thanks, praise, and promises never to let go again. Lily was crying too, but her eyes couldn't leave Rex. "Don't leave him alone," I say between sobs. "Please, Mommy, don't leave him alone." Mark radioed for the vet's specially adapted van to leave. There was no time for slow protocols. Rex's injuries could be internal and serious. Together, they carefully transported him, covering him with a thermal blanket that soon became soaked in the rain. In the clinic's gurney at the base, the world shrinks to the sound of rain pounding against the vehicle's roof and Rex's irregular heartbeat against the metal floor. Field notes are interspersed with promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Lily, sitting in the back seat with Emily, held one of the notes she had given Rex days before. Today it was crumpled and damp, but the phrase she had written was still legible. "No matter how sad you are, you still have family." She repeated it softly, once more, as if it were a mantra. In the clinic, the emergency room was blurry. Emily and Lily waited anxiously in a white room, permeated with disinfectant. Mark paced back and forth between the clinic and the main office, giving reports. Anticipating interrogations, mentally noting the official version of events. A close contact situation with a minor. But there was something that couldn't be erased from the report. Rex lay sprawled between the danger and the girl, taking the blow that could have killed her. This wasn't a matter of opinion or interpretation. It was a fact. The next few hours were a blur. The surgery took longer than expected. There were complications with Rex's breathing under anesthesia, probably due to previous internal scarring. I went there when Lily, overcoming the initial resistance of the adults, entered the area where Rex was connected to the machines. Rex was motionless, his skin shaved in some areas, with tubes protruding from his leg and neck. His eyes were closed, and the monitor's sound was playing at an irregular rhythm. "Hey," he whispered, bringing his hand closer to the one without the IV. "I told you I didn't want you to be alone." His finger touched the cut on his paw. For a second, nothing changed. Then, a slight tremor ran through Rex's body, barely perceptible. Lily leaned in a little closer. "Rex, it's me, Lily," I said in a deep voice. "You were my friend when I was young. Can you help me?" The words, so similar to those from that first day in the kennel, followed a mysterious path. No one in that room knew exactly how a dog's mind worked under anesthesia. Rex, in a deep, unconscious state, began to walk among the rubble. Tom's figure, as always, swayed slightly, clutching his back, walking in an overly bright light. Then he heard her, the voice of a little girl, not a baby, calling him by name, telling him she didn't want to be alone. The invisible belt shot out with greater force in the other direction, smelling of disinfectant and crayons, with the touch of a tiny hand on its paw. I walked toward the voice. As I did, I felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The heart monitor registered a slight spike and then stabilized at a fairly regular rhythm. The veterinarian, not believing in miracles but respecting the data, sighed with satisfaction. Lily smiled through her tears. "I told you," she whispered, stroking her paw again. "They still have family." The recovery days were slow. Rex had to learn to move with a partially immobilized leg, to tolerate the constant presence of humans around him without associating it with danger. Every time the pain seemed